Hello, Neil from Diagonal Move, back with Cataclysm, looking now at the 1933 turn and the action phase. We're going to be drawing stuff out of the cup now and seeing what happens. This is the bulk of the game. We've done the initial production and so on during the previous video, which touched on how you convert things to flags and offensives and units and things like that. This now is the bulk of the turn that we're going to play. Turns are of variable length in the game depending on how much one faction provokes another, and with that in mind I will probably try to keep this video reasonably short like the last couple, just to make it a bit more manageable for me in terms of filming and also just sheer thinking time, trying to control, not only the Soviet Union as the power that I'm playing, but also as the 6 other factions as well in the game. Okay, so let's just jump straight in. I've got this cup here filled with stuff, and we will draw from that cup straight away. And we have the home front check for the Soviet Union. Now, what this normally means is we would need to conduct an effectiveness check to determine how stable the political powers are in the relevant country. Now, because we are at civilian commitment levels as the Soviets right now, that's shown up on the faction chart just there. What that means is we essentially don't do the home front check at the moment, and what will happen then is that counter will just go onto the turn track for use next turn, and there's going to be a few of those, one for each faction, and the only one really that might be affected by that this turn is actually Japan. So next counter. I'm doing this randomly, by the way, just off screen, just for sheer space. And we have the same thing for Germany. Again, Germany is at civilian, so there is currently no home front check. So again, straight back onto the turn track for that counter. Next chit, we have the an offensive for Italy. Now, Italy can spend that in order to do that Abyssinian adventure that I mentioned briefly in the last turn. And essentially what this Abyssinian adventure represents is the invasion of Ethiopia by Italy. So basically what we do is we roll dice equal to the number of military actions spent, and if the result is 5 or more, flip the Abyssinian adventure marker to its Rome resource side and place it and a cube in Rome. Okay, so we get extra stuff and extra VPs by performing this if we're successful. However, we do only have the 1 die to spend because I've only got the 1 action, and therefore we will only have 1 dice, and it's a 5+. And the only other thing to bear in mind is there will be a provocation against both France and the UK. So I'll place that there, and I'll grab a dice and hope for the best with 5s and 6s. We have faction-specific dice in Cataclysm, and so we have the black dice. That's blue, but we have black dice for the fascist powers in this game. I do like me a faction-specific dice when they're available, and we have a 4. So that action was unsuccessful, which is a bit of a pain. Does it count as a provocation? I believe it probably does, looking at that, because we are attempting it even if we are not successful. So provocation simply means the French and the British will both gain a flag to do political actions. Now we can do one of 2 things. We can place those flags onto the reserve box if there's space, and there is in both cases, or we can place them directly into the cup for a random turn for them to be presented, and I'll place them both into the politics track. Now, what you may have noticed, astute observers may have noticed, is that I didn't offer any opportunity for any of the factions to interrupt when I drew the 2nd and 3rd of those counters just then. So what I'll try and do is I will try to remember to do that, and it's one of the things that makes Cataclysm a little bit more tricky than some games to play solo. But let's have a think then about interrupting. Now, the fascists have just been, so the fascist powers cannot interrupt. You cannot do 2 things in a row with the same ideology. Therefore, as the Soviets, do I want to interrupt? No. Do the democracies want to do anything? Honestly, probably not right now. We'll see how we go. Okay, next chip. And we have the Japanese home front. Okay, this is a stability check because they're at the mobilization, sorry, not mobilization, they're at rearmament, and therefore the Japan will need to do one of those effectiveness checks. Because it's a home front, it counts as a stability check. Now what that does is it represents the status of the government. And if you fail, you move your stability counter from sort of steady to wavering, unstable, and eventually collapse. And one of the ways to win the game is to force opposing powers to collapse and then eventually surrender. And when you have a certain number of surrendered powers, you can end the game early. But the more challenging aspect of this right now is not so much about winning the game, it's about surviving these stability checks as the power you're playing. And essentially what we'll do is we will roll dice equal to the effectiveness, which is 2, and then 5s upwards will count as a success. Less than 5 will unfortunately mean a reduction in stability for Japan. Now Japan are currently on 3 stability, which is steady. Okay, so let's roll, and we're just looking for 5s and 6s. We have a 5, that's awesome, so Japan passes its stability check. Interrupts, anybody want to interrupt? Again, not much change there for the Soviets or the democracy powers, so let's go. Now one thing we could think about, actually, the Americans could think about at least, is adding aid using their military action, which is the offensive marker. There's a sort of an arrow there for the Americans. What they can do is they can send aid to China to support in the civil war. Now that is, I believe, a military action. Yes, of course it is, because it's an offensive. But what that means is we would just for now place that counter one side or another of a place where there's a civil war. Now China is currently undergoing a civil war. We have a fascist support in Jiangsu and communist support in Qicom. That's the name of one of the factions in China, the Hubei province. And that's called intervention. I don't believe you'd really do anything apart from send a counter there. But let me just double check. Yeah, you do. You just place the counter on the relevant side of the Civil War marker. Now that's going to be either left or right, depending on which side you want to support. Obviously, typically the right side would be fascist, the left side would be democracy and communist. But what it does is it provokes any other faction in the region or any other power in the region that also has an interest there. Now, that may not be the appropriate thing to do right now, because the more political actions the Germans have, the quicker they will be to do things to reindustrialise Rhineland, ally with Italy, that sort of thing. So we're going to not interrupt as the Americans right now, although it's an option that they could have done. Again, the political actions available for all sides are things like alliances, diplomacy with certain places. You can attempt to increase your stability, that kind of thing. And as at this beginning phase, we're just kind of like manoeuvring, if you like, just manoeuvring. Okay. Now the Americans, sorry, not the Americans, the British and the French are both at wavering stability. Now at this point, it may be worthwhile one of them interrupting, now that they have got a flag, just to boost that. While the Germans and the Italians and the Japanese aren't being particularly aggressive, we could use this as an opportunity to interrupt. And I think I will. I think British will interrupt. So this is not an actual action, this is an interrupt action. Very similar things. So that counter there comes off and goes onto the track. And they will roll 2 dice and basically 5s or 6s will allow them to increase their stability. Number of dice is due to their effectiveness rating of 2, and we have a 5. They're successful. Their stability will now go up 1. If they failed that political action, you would place a cube here, which would basically be a die roll modifier for next time. The only action that does not get that in the political sphere of the game is diplomacy, which is effectively when you non-aggressively take over a country, if that makes any sense. It's not military force, it's annexing the Sudetenland, things like that. Okay, next real counter then. By the way, the fascists could also interrupt now, and so could the Soviets. Kind of just go around until everyone's had a chance to do that, but no one's going to do that at the moment. Next counter, real counter, is the Japanese aircraft. They will just be placed somewhere in Japanese territory and then moved around using a deployment action. And so basically they will come onto the board somewhere where they can reach undisrupted industrial resources, so Tokyo, and then they can deploy somewhere. And I think it would be sensible to deploy them to Korea, where they can have a good bit of support down that Chinese coast should the Japanese invade anytime soon. Interrupt opportunities. No, I don't think there are nothing much has particularly changed on the European map, so that's more or less going to be as is. Next one, we have the Italian home front. They're at civilian, so they will go there. Interrupt opportunities, no change really, I don't think. No change. Although, as the Italians, I mean, the Italians can't go, but the Italians do want to increase their commitment to 1-to-1, because when they do get that second resource, they'll be able to get more resources, because currently they're really restricted on what they can actually build with their resources. And of course the Germans want to get their stuff pretty quick. So anyway, let's draw the next counter and see where we're up to. American soldiers. Well, those American soldiers are just going to have to sit in the US for now. They have no colonies. Well, they do actually. They have the Philippines. But you can't easily get there right now, so they're probably going to go and just live on the east coast of the US, which is up here. And we're pretty much at stacking limit actually for that area. It's two counters of any type is the stacking limit. Could put them on the west coast, but then we've got to deal with things like delays, getting them across to the east coast when they eventually need to be in Europe, things like that. Okay. Interrupts. Good question. I think Germany are going to have a think about what they can do about the Rhineland. It's a political action to flip the Rhineland. Okay, let's interrupt and do that. Now, that may well be a provocation. In fact, I'm pretty sure it will be a provocation to somebody. Each faction provokes other factions through certain political actions, and we'll just have to double check what all that is. Basically, commitment increases and alliances will provoke the French, British and Soviets as the Germans, but the Rhineland is a special action, and that means, well, we can do it two ways actually. This action we can spend through interrupt the political action on the flag on the record display, or we can just move a unit in. I think we'll try it that way first, because the Germans do get 3 dice, because they are the most effective government in the game, at least at this point in the game anyway. They didn't really change actually that, but they just, the stability goes. Okay, 3 dice. We've got a 5, that's awesome. That means the Rhineland now gives us 2 resources. So that's rapidly increasing the Germans' industrial capability. Okay, but it doesn't. Oh yes, it is a provocation for France and its allies. Now there are no allies as such for France at the moment, so the only provocation is for the French, and again we decide where to put it. We can place it in the reserve box just there, which is currently full, so we will have to either reject it, which means just put it back in where it came from, or chuck it straight into the cup. And I think the French will chuck it straight into the cup. Political actions are hard to come by for the French, certainly at this point in the game. Okay, next turn. Do the French, British, Americans or Soviets want to do anything? No, I don't think they want to interrupt. The Germany, they do need to get rid of that counter back into their box there. Now, that had actually, for the Germans, that's actually kind of potentially irritated whoever would be playing the Italians, because they now cannot ally unless they get another political action in there. You have to spend 2 political actions to ally. But the Germans are about to rebuild their war machine, I think. Meanwhile, me as a Soviet player, I'm just biding my time, seeing what happens. Okay, crisis. Okay, we have a crisis marker. There are 4 of these in the game, and basically they act as the timer for the turn. With the first 3 that are drawn, you roll a dice against the table, depending on whether the board state is war or peace. We're currently at peace, so we're rolling on the crisis table for that board state. When the 4th crisis counter is revealed, though, it becomes sudden death, and what that means is you will assess the status of the counters in the cup, and if it's above or below a certain threshold, you will or will not continue the turn, depending on what this threshold is. So I need to find that table somewhere amongst this mountain of stuff I've got off camera. So roll the dice. 1 dice will be indicative of the number on the left hand side, the other one indicative of the number on the right, and we'll see what we get and see what happens. So we have a 2-1, which is an international incident. Roll 2 dice, taking the highest result. The powers indicated each gain a flag. Okay, so we have a 6 and a 4, which means the 6 plus the Japanese and Soviet Union both gain a flag. Okay, awesome. So flags for the Soviets and the Japanese. Now the Soviets and the Japanese as well actually both have flags in that reserve box, so they will just go straight into the cup. And hopefully you can start to see how this addition and subtraction of things from various places in the game really leads to quite a dynamic turn, but also a turn of variable length. Okay. Next counter, no interrupts again, I don't think. Americans kept some planes, and they will go to the US homeland. When you draw a counter from the cup, if you don't want to spend it straight away and you have space on the reserve track, you can place it on the reserve track rather than onto the board. Again, if you don't have space and you don't want to use it or you can't play it, you just have to reject it and put it back wherever it came from, basically. Okay, next counter. We have home front for the French. The French are at civilian, so that will also just be placed on the turn track. Okay, Civil War resolution is the next one. This is where we determine that the effect of our aid in other countries is on the result of their civil war. Now, we are really only going to be looking at China, which is a special case. The Chinese civil war has its own set of rules. Nowhere else is currently at in that state. So let's see what effect that has. Basically, we need to work out what's going on between the GMD and the GCOM sides in that war. The area with the most patronage from other factions will effectively roll more dice if they can. But everyone starts with 2 dice, and what happens is you first work out whether the war is going to be active, which it is because we've got forces in there. Then the more numerous faction must attack an adjacent area containing an opposing Chinese army. If the factions are tied, the GMD must attack and do not move the attacking army, just designate that the armies will be fighting. Well, we do have GCON and GMD there, so they will be fighting, and then we roll the dice based on a 2 starting plus an additional dice for the most supported faction, which in this case will be GCON. So 3 against 2, and we have 4 for the GMD, and a total of, what is that? That is 11. Wow, okay, so 11. So one roll is more than double the other, which means the losing army removes all its aid marker and is flipped to the winner's side, removing any cubes in the area. Okay, so that guy flips. Cool. So we have 2 GCOM counters in China now, but we need to try to do the same with the GMD. So now we'll have the GMD here with the German support will attack into the space adjacent to them, probably Hebei, and in this case it's going to be 3 apiece because we have aid from both. So it'll be 3 for the GMD, which is going to be the blue, and then 3 for the Soviet faction. And we have, what have we got? Wow, that's a lot. That's 9, 14 for the GMD, 12, 16 for the Soviet-backed faction. That's one roll is higher, but not double. Therefore, the losing army removes attached aid markers. So that comes off for the Germans, wherever it's gone. The army units must retreat to an adjacent uncontrolled Chinese country with no army, which it can't really do at the moment. So there's no legal place, meaning the army is removed from the map. That's a bit of a disaster for the GMD forces there. Okay, if the area is vacated, the winning faction expands by placing a new army there. So GCOM are taking over Jiangsu. We do have one more faction remaining though. Okay, so we need to do the same thing down here with the GMD in Guangdong and then GCOM in Jiangsu. That's going to be 2 straight. And that is going to be, yeah, that's a massive victory for the Chinese faction. Okay, that is yeah, in the case where it's massively increased like that, you end up flipping the faction over. So the Chinese Civil War, I believe, has ended because we've only got one faction. Yeah, it immediately ends. Wow, that was super quick. When armies from only one Chinese faction remain in play, the Chinese Civil War immediately ends. Check the Chinese Civil War marker to its inactive side and place an influence marker to indicate the winning faction's patrons. Okay, now what that means is the Soviets are going to get a +1 bonus when performing diplomacy against areas with Chinese armies. That's useful from my Soviet player's point of view. And the Civil War is permanently ended, but next time we attempt to resolve the Civil War, the faction will attempt to expand. And essentially they will try to expand into other areas in China. Okay, that is quite complicated and far more complicated than the normal Civil War resolution. So I think what I will do now is I will pause the video while I have a think about what that may mean for play on the other sides, and I will carry on the remainder of the turn in the next video, because this one has gone on now probably slightly longer than 20 minutes. Cool. Okay, thanks for joining. Carrying on with this turn in the next video.